Welcome everyone to the Hurting Humanity channel. I want to talk about the fires that are going across the Midwest right now, because I think the main narrative most people have, which is rightfully so, is that they are obviously attacking our food supply, our water supply, our air supply. This is stuff that is not new. This is stuff that everybody should know now. And we've seen a lot of these directed energy weapon fires in places like Texas that completely wiped out livestock, which was done deliberately. And what we're seeing now in Wyoming and Utah is a lot of the livestock being wiped out as continuous fires are being set ablaze in these places. And they want you to believe that this is something to do with the climate. So of course they're going to push their propaganda to convince you as to why this is happening. Because if you realize and you listen to quotes from people like Henry Kissinger, people who have had such power in the global world order, they've openly talked about having to control the food and the water supply in order to control the people. And that's part of the game that we're in right now. So while we see all of these hurricanes popping up, while we see all this flooding going on, we're also seeing the directed energy weapons being used to create these fires. And I want to point everybody's attention towards something else that's going on as well with Wyoming and livestock with the digital health certificates. It's really important because this has to do with CRISPR. It has to do with getting potions inside of livestock, especially if livestock are going to cross state lines. So they're trying to set this in place with digital health certificates for us. And as we know, they look at us like cattle. So obviously they're going to start by having these mandates in place where all cattle and all livestock are going to need digital health certificates, which eventually we will need. And that way we can tell what each animal has, which animals have what shot. And this is all about using these animals to transport CRISPR, which is gene editing, into our bodies. But the first thing I'm going to show you is what's going on over there before I get into the gene editing. And I want you to pay attention to this propaganda, because this is your Tavistock-run news media trying to convince innocent civilians out there why their homes are burning to the ground, why their acres are being destroyed, why their cattle and livestock are being killed off. Well, it's because of the earth warming a little bit, a couple of degrees. And now we're seeing fires in the middle of October when it's not even hot in places like Wyoming.
Tonight, firefighters are battling the growing Yellow Lake fire, now at 19,000 acres in the Uinta Mountains. The biggest fire of the season is burning in October. And if you're wondering if fire season seems longer than it used to, the answer is yes. In fact, experts say climate change is making our environment hotter and drier, which leads to these longer fire seasons.
A wildfire of this severity, of this size, and this late in the season would have been extremely rare, if not unheard of, 15 or 20 years ago.
Professor Bradley Washaw there teaches wildland fire science at Utah State University. He says fires of this magnitude, this late in the year, have never been common. And they're putting a strain on firefighters and their resources, too.
We have firefighters that have, exceeded 1,000 hours of overtime. And when you put that in perspective of a normal seasonal firefighter that's hired just for the fire season, in the federal system, they're on what's called a 1039 appointment, which is 1,039 hours. I mean, they're working that many hours of overtime. And you look at incident management teams, we have people that it's a collateral duty. It's not their daily job, and they've gone out 5 times already this season. So that's having a major impact on our firefighting resources.
The fires also have an impact on people who live in the fire's path, like this longtime timber family we met.
The fire came through, burned through our timber cell. When the wind shifted hard Saturday, it came through our other timber cell that we just purchased a few weeks ago. So as of right now, we don't know if we have any more wood to, even go after. As far as we know, we may be going out of business.
Professor Phil Dennison from the University of Utah says we'll have to adapt to smokier summers and falls as the effects of climate change become clear.
In the coming years, we're going to have longer fire seasons. Fire seasons are going to be more severe. They'll start earlier, they'll end later, and we'll see more unusual fires that would traditionally be out of season.
Researchers say human-caused climate change is a key driver in the extent of today's wildfires. And Professor Dennison says people need to take responsibility and be more careful.
A lot of fires in Utah are started by humans, so we can start out by reducing ignitions, and that will allow us to better fight fires that are easier to control, fires that are ignited by lightning in many cases. Then we can also just prepare our homes and our structures. We can clear the vegetation around our structures.
So again, if anything, this is just arson being committed by our government. All around the earth right now, they are obviously using directed energy weapons. They are using HARP. They are using weaponized weather against civilians. And people need to become aware of it fast before all dependency and self-dependency goes right into the hands of the government, which is what they want. They don't want you to be able to do any of these things on your own. Because if you need the government for everything, if you need the government specifically for food and water, you won't be able to be independent of the government, right? Because we need food and water to live. If they want to get certain things inside your body that are going to edit your genetic code, you're going to have to comply. So they're going to take over the food and water supply. And they're going to force you into either dying of starvation, dying of dehydration, or complying with them and doing as they say if you want food and water. So it's interesting that all this stuff is happening in Wyoming and in Utah. And if you read the underlying narrative, look at some of these stories that are out there. Wyoming moose cattle test positive for anthrax. Huh? Okay, so suddenly moose and cattle in Wyoming are testing positive for anthrax. At the same time as that story being out there, they have the livestock board moving to digital health certificates. And they want to make sure that everybody's on board and complying with this. And of course, they'll tell you, look, there's all these fires. So cattle have to cross from, Wyoming into South Dakota or into Utah because we got to save the cattle, right? They want you to immediately think about saving the cattle, which of course needs to be done, even though these are the people who are trying to kill the cattle. But at the same time, there's an underlying agenda, and that's the digital health certificate. This is what the WHO and everybody else out there in these global health organizations has been trying to mandate on us. Digital health certificates. In other words, these digital health certificates will be like digital passports. You will not be able to go in and out of states. You will not be able to move around freely unless, of course, you're compliant with all the things that you're supposed to have injected inside of your body. And the food supply chain is very important to them, not just to kill off, but to use it as a way to transmit CRISPR, which is, look, the future of food, CRISPR, edited agriculture. This is something they've been talking about for years. I've covered CRISPR many times, okay? CRISPR, just for anyone out there that's new to this stuff, okay? If you get CRISPR gene editing into an animal, it's transmissible through eating that animal. So if they tell you that there's a bird flu and that the only way you could keep all your chickens on your farm in your backyard is to make sure that they have this very special dosage inside of them for the avian flu, well, all of a sudden your food supply has that in it. And now if you eat the eggs or you eat the chicken, now all of a sudden you're a victim of gene editing. So let me just show you some of the stuff that's out there that I've covered in the past about them, openly talking about CRISPR and how it is and can be transmitted from the food supply chain into a person's body, which would be no different than you getting a shot directly into your body.
CRISPR is amazing because it allows us to precisely edit the DNA in living organisms, including in people and plants. With CRISPR, we can change, remove, or replace the genes that govern the function of cells. This means that we now have the ability to use CRISPR like a word processor to find, cut, and paste text.
In 2011, scientists created glow-in-the-dark cats. The researchers took a gene from glowing jellyfish and inserted it into the unfertilized eggs of house cats. It was a neat trick, but they had a bigger goal in mind.
So obviously we know that this is something that they're going to continue to do with these directed energy weapons. You don't even hear them really talking about these fires too much on the mainstream media. They just casually mention, oh, there's a fire in Wyoming, as if all this stuff is just normal. Fires here, hundreds of thousands of acres ablaze, livestock being butchered, hurricanes that are going from west to east that are just forming, that are, they were first calling category 6 potential because the category 5 isn't enough to handle how big these hurricanes are. These are things that are not normal. These are not natural events. They want you to think that it's natural because if you realize that your government has built all of these weapons over the years while you've been busy trying to live the American dream, giving power to the corporations to build all of this, where they've told you, hey, we're going to build directed energy weapon lasers. And you're supposed to go, oh, wow, what's that for? Well, it's to protect you from Russia or China. And then when you realize, wait a minute, you've built all of these weapons for us to use on us so that you could herd us like cattle, move us around, kill off our food supply, and then convince us that it has something to do with carbon emissions so that we can feel responsible. Because remember, that's the underlying theme in all of this. Humans are responsible for this. Our behavior is responsible because, again, this goes back to Larry Fink. This goes back to behavioral control, controlling your behavior, which means controlling where you go, what you do, how often you leave your house, and eventually just doing everything online where they can fully monitor and track you with your digital ID. So people don't even realize how easy it is for them to start these types of fires that we're seeing, right? We know aluminum is an accelerant. Okay, they're dumping aluminum and barium from the skies over all of these forests. Then they're using these quote unquote lasers in the middle of the night, or sometimes they're using drones. We've seen footage of some of the drones that they've sent out. And then the drone just, it's amazing that you see the technology out there where they show us that there's drones that literally are flame-throwing drones, and they're selling them in retail stores. What, you don't think that the government would ever do that to you or try to use that against you, right? And obviously the goal of the globalists always has been total world control, world domination, which really comes down to controlling you and everything you do. And the only way they'll ever control you fully is to have the technology in place and control of the food and water supply, period. Because what else are people, how are you going to farm and do these things on your own if they won't allow you to do it? So anybody out there who thinks that they're going to, this is what their plan is, and they're going to blame it on the climate, right? It's like in the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. There's a lot of lingo in there about how they don't even feel responsible for being a third party in a sense, right? So if they use a directed energy weapon on your home, they don't feel like it's really their fault. They feel like they're innocent of the crime because they didn't do it deliberately with their own bare hands. That's how sadistic and sick these people are. So back to the story. We have to keep an eye on some of the underlying themes, right? We know that the livestock are under attack. We know that they don't want independent farming. They don't want any of this stuff that people think that they're going to do to get away from them. Right? They're already thinking about this. Remember, this is their game. So they know that there's people like us that exist. They listen to us with their algorithm, right? To see what we're talking about doing, where we're planning on going. So they obviously know. I mean, how many channels out there are off-grid channels, off-grid farming channels? We all, have this vision of that's what we want to do, and they're already aware of that. So they already have plans in place to make sure that that doesn't happen. Right? So whether it's directed energy weapons, whether it's causing deliberate droughts in certain regions, whether it's having trains derail and blow up chemical bombs outside of Amish farms, these are all things they're strategically doing as if we're living in a game of Risk, the board game Risk. That is exactly how they're playing this right now. So we could see some of those stories, but don't forget the underneath all of that, right? When we see the fire, we think of directed energy weapon. Those other stories like livestock board moving to digital health certificates. It's crucial because once they start implementing this on the livestock and once they say, oh, there's an avian flu again, or we finally have the cure for avian flu, it's this CRISPR shot, then it's going to be mandated that all of the cattle, every cattle, even if you're an independent farmer, you don't sell you just have a farm in your backyard and you got a couple of bulls back there, tough. They're not going to care. They're going to show up and say, you got to have a digital passport, digital certificate. Everything on here every animal you own has to have it in them because we can't take a risk that your animal is going to transmit it to another animal and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And all these people just fall for it hook, line, and sinker. So it's a way to contaminate the food supply chain with CRISPR. And it's also a way to get you conditioned into what's eventually supposed to happen to us, their plan at least, which is the digital health certificate, which is the digital ID, which will monitor and track everything that every person has. They'll be able to quarantine people at will. Oh, so-and-so doesn't have it. So-and-so was in this region where this outbreak occurred. We're going to lock you down. We're going to put you in a quarantine camp that you're never going to exit. We're going to force inoculations on you. That's what the plan is. Unless, of course, the people rise up against it, which doesn't seem very likely to occur because the civilians are putting all of their hope, of course, in the basket of these politicians that they think that they elect, who are actually responsible for this sabotage that is occurring. So prayers again for people out there who are affected, their livestock that are affected. Prayers for all civilians, because we're all going to be affected and continue to be affected, whether it's them poisoning our air, poisoning our water, poisoning our food, or just poisoning our flesh. They're doing it all to us. And they're all, they're able to blame it on that boogeyman that they created in people's minds. That's what, I talk about PSYOPs, psychological operations. You say a lie long enough, people believe the lie. Everybody out there sees that the weather's being weird. That's exactly what they expected. They have the lie in place so that you automatically believe that it's something to do with cow farts and the water oceans warming. Meanwhile, they're using all of this technology that they've mastered over the last 80 to 100 years, and they're using it on us, our food supply, and our lives so that they could have more control over us, so that they could make us, of course, conform to what they want, and they're angry. They're angry mainly because of the fact that most of us don't feel like becoming mixed with machine, that most of us didn't want to get gene edited a few years ago. So now they're saying, well, now you're not going to have a choice, because when we come after you and you're farming and everything else, and you don't have food or water, you're going to have to comply, because if you're going to want to come to one of our shelters and have food and water, well, you're going to have a certain something inside of your body. And that's where people are really going to have to, hopefully connect the dots and figure out what's going on. But at this point, this is just an everyday occurrence, right? I mean, how many of these fires are we seeing that they're telling us are from the climate that aren't? How many of these hurricanes do we need to see with these bizarre weather patterns, like going, inland west, the hurricane, Helene, the pattern that it was, just naturally everybody should say this isn't normal, this isn't right. But nobody's aware of weather modification and weather control. They think it's a crazy conspiracy because they've been brainwashed into it. And then on top of that, they've already programmed probably the dumbest breed of human being, which are really the people who call themselves Democrats, because they're the ones who are on board and okay with all of this stuff. They're literally, if you watch old communist propaganda, they are exactly that to a T. They don't have any free thought at all whatsoever, but they're empowered so much so by the government that they think the decisions that they're making are free thoughts. They are completely 100% brain dead, useless sheeple. I thank everybody for being here. Hope you're all well. God bless you and your families as always.